Repeat it. Learn. Okay. Answer biblical questions. What is this? What is this? I heard it. This is history. It's 6,000 years of history. When did they stop writing it? 2,023 years ago, plus or minus 100 years, right? Because we're not sure how we got today's calendar completely. So, what else should a Christian be a student of that falls along with history? What else, what other fields should a Christian be a student of that falls in the line with history? No, I want you to prove the Bible without it. I want you to prove the Bible without it in your hand.
Archaeology.
Archaeology.
The Bible is sufficient by itself. I don't need that. I don't need to dig up relics.
Okay. I'm Mormon. I don't believe the Bible. It wasn't translated correctly. How do I approach him?
Well, you have to, either you believe by faith or you don't believe. It's up to you. I can't force you to believe it.
So the Mormons have faith. They have faith in their books. But the only way you beat a Mormon over the head is you have to reach in and grab one of their pillars of faith, yank it out, and put one of the Bible ones in. You don't win. And by win, I say you don't convert them if you can't support them. But you have to be able today in this world to prove this book without this book. Another field you should study is science. Yes?
That Mormon fellow doesn't believe the Bible. You've been from it away from him when he dies.
True. But they're raised from youth knowing what they know.
I think there's several places we can go. We go to astronomy, we can go to biology, we can go to nature, we can go to a lot of things that we see around us all the time.
Right.
God's existence.
You should be a general student of the world. A Renaissance person. Now, do you realize you are part of the largest social engineering hoax that's going on today? According to Satan. Just put your hand on the book, just put your hand on the TV and pray, and you'll be saved. Hasn't he done a really good job of social engineering?
Because I think what they tend to do is, in the field that I'm in, they talk about spirituality,
Right.
or spiritual fitness,
Right.
and they can't clearly define it.
They don't include God.
You know.
Okay, so into our history lesson. Let's start in Exodus chapter 10, verse 27. So today, I'm going to teach you the history of communion. And we're going to start in Exodus chapter 10. Now, depending on the translation, and depending on who translated and all that, older translations say different things from newer translations. Sometimes newer translations give us a different insight. Whether the translation is right or wrong, everybody can argue. But for 95% of translations, they agree on most of the wording. So, in Exodus chapter 10, what happened? starting in verse 27. Where are we at in Exodus? Dealing with Pharaoh? What plague? We're at plague number 9. Pharaoh has just thrown Moses out again and told him, get out of my face. If I see you again, I'm going to kill you. Right? I'm paraphrasing some, but that's what he told him, right? And at the start of chapter 11, what does God tell Moses? One more plague. What is he going to do? What is God going to do? I'm going to kill all the firstborn. So if you're the firstborn, raise your hand. If you're Egyptian, what are you? Dead. If you're a Jew, what are you? You're dead. Except, what are you supposed to do if you're not going to be dead? You're going to follow instructions, right? What are the instructions? Okay, but there's instructions before the mark.
Kill all the boy babies.
No. What are the instructions to the Jews?
They shall be in line without blemish and sprinkle the blood on their doorposts.
Farther back than that. What is my family? And we'll say I've got 15 people in my family. What are we supposed to do first? There we go. First. I'm supposed to pick a lamb. What kind of lamb? No blemish, unspotted. How old?
14. Days.
When am I supposed to pick it? Supposed to be a male, okay. When am I supposed to pick the lamb?
After 14 days.
No. When am I supposed to pick the lamb? On the 10th day. Okay, now, I made a comment earlier about the calendar. Who sets the calendar?
So who set the
Who
calendar?
sets the calendar? Okay. Look at verse 2 in chapter 12. In this case, God set the calendar. What did God just do in verse 2?
This was at the beginning of one for you.
Okay. What did God just do, though, in verse 12 of Exodus chapter 2? Verse 2 of Exodus chapter 12. What did he do?
He specified something.
He specified a new calendar. He said, this is the first day of your new year. Right? That's what it says. Okay, let me get my questions out.
First year, right?
Yep, first year
First month.
of the first year. Now, how is Israel going to leave Egypt? They're leaving in this direction, but how are they going to leave?
They live with everything that they own and they will borrow from
y'all missing something. I'm at home, I get a phone call, it's my little brother, and he says, hey, you need to get here now. Something's wrong with whoever, you pick whoever. What do? They told me now, right?
You're gonna leave it on you.
You're going to pick up whatever you think you need, and you're leaving, right? Are you waiting? Are you stopping to go the next day? No, we're not. We're getting in the car and going. It's mom, or it's dad, or it's your best friend from high school, whoever it is. You're leaving. Israel is going to leave that way. How did it get funded? Something I hadn't thought of until I did this looking. How did it get funded? The Egyptians funded it. What did God tell Moses to do? Ask the Egyptians for their gold and silver. That's in chapter 11, verse 2. They didn't pay for it. They didn't have any money, right? Okay, now we're going to Exodus chapter 12. Would somebody read verses 1 through 11 of Exodus chapter 12, please?
Moses, 12, right?
Yep, 12.
And the Lord spake to Moses and Aaron, the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, and the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their father, a lamb for a house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, male first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep, or from the goats. Ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. They shall take of the blood, write it on the two side posts, and on the upper door post of the house, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor silent at all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the increments thereof. And he shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
Okay. These are instructions to who? To the Israelites, to the Hebrews, to the Jews, to Moses' community, right? So, we said it had to be picked on the 10th. When did Israel slaughter the lamb? on the 14th day. Who did it? Who did the slaughter? The whole community. They all did a lamb on the 14th. How did they cook it? They put it on the fire. How did they put it on the fire? Whole. What did they cook? They cooked everything. The brains, the stomach, everything inside of it, its hooves, its fur. Have you ever smelled lamb cooking? To me, it's as bad as collards, sorry. When you eat it, it tastes marvelous. But when it's cooking, oh, man. How did they eat it? How did they eat it? Okay. Army folks, you ever ate in haste? And I'm done. I'm walking away. I did 5 minutes and I'm done eating. I'm not lying, am I? And if you're in basic training, you can eat in 2 minutes. Right? Because that tray, you're going to tip it up and it's going to slide in your mouth and you're going to swallow. That's how God is telling the Israelites to eat. How were they dressed? Ready to leave. So, what time were they eating this meal? In the evening. Okay, now, let's look at verses 12 and 13. It's taken us from 10 verse 27 to chapter 12 verse 12 to get to this point. What happens in verse 12? And what time does it happen?
He said that I passed through the land of Egypt this night and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast.
Okay, I missed the verb, but that's good. I messed up. 10 verse 27 to 12 verse 29. What time does verse 29 happen? Midnight. They're eating. They're dressed to leave. At midnight, what happens? I'm Egyptian. What happens? Firstborn are dead. Whose families were affected by the firstborn dying? Pharaoh to the lowest donkey herder, to the lowest sheep herder. And what did they lose? They lost the firstborn of all the kids, cows, camels, donkeys, any critter they raised to have around. They lost the firstborn, correct?
They would go to the children and blood on the doorpost. They came in and kept the firstborn at that time.
Correct. So, if I'm a faithful Israelite, what did I do to my door? I took the blood from the lamb which I slaughtered, and I put it on the lintel, and I put it on the doorpost. The angel of the Lord is coming by. This, okay?
Okay, on verse 4.
Where, 12 or 4?
Verse 4 of chapter 12.
Mm-hmm.
It says, and the household to be little, and if the household be too little, and the land, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall take it. So, my question is on that soul. Here, God says number of souls. So, God is referring to a living being, person,
Mm-hmm.
as souls.
Yep.
You know, and expatiate on that because one of the reasons I'm asking this question on component of a human being, soul, body, spirit, stuff like that. Yeah, God chose to call a living being a soul. If you don't have the answer now, you can give it to me later, but I want to pay attention to that.
So that may be a translation thing. What translation are you reading from?
King James.
Okay. So, Holman's Christian Bible, which, right or wrong translation, in the place of soul says person. So in the King James, soul and person could have been interchangeable. I don't know enough to know that, but I'd have to look. I can look, though. Does somebody have a New American Standard or New King James? Verse 4, chapter 12.
New American Standard.
Okay.
Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house will take one according to the number of persons in it. According to what each man should eat, yours will divide the land.
Okay, so it could be a translational issue. King James is 1600. Some of the newer ones are 1800s. Yep. Okay, what's too small?
It's not enough for everybody to eat.
Or it's too much for everybody to eat? Does God give us a number? No. So the number of too small or too big probably isn't important to us. But what's important is that they did it, right? Okay, back to our doors. This is an Egyptian household. What happened?
And that's comes in. And towards death comes in.
All the firstborn died. This is a Jewish house, an Israelite house. What happened? Passed over.
The blood on the door. If the blood on the door, you got to.
If the blood was on the door.
Little bit is done.
Israelite house, Israelite house. What happened here? Firstborn died.
Let me have a comment.
Okay.
And we as being children of God, we got to keep the blood on our doorpost. See? So when judgment day comes, God will pass through and not hurt us because we got all outstanding judgment. Because, you know, we don't go in Matthew, what Luke tells us that 2 is a meal.
I have to do this today.
Yeah.
I don't have to put blood on my doorpost.
No, but symbolic.
Symbolically I do. But I don't have to physically paint it like practicing Jews do.
Going 2,000 years away from that, I know they look better.
Blood of Christ taking place.
Yeah.
But my example was that we need to keep our doors painted red too. And that was to receive God.
Right.
Because he made Luke and Matthew that 2 gonna be at the meal, one be taken, the other gonna be left.
Yep.
Which is giving you an example of how that our lives are supposed to be spent. God just ain't gonna take us there because we disobeyed God. We want to live that life so that he'll know us and won't pass us over. Because when we are in our sin, we are in darkness to God. We got to get the sin out way so God can know it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't the components of the blood, it wasn't the hemoglobin, it wasn't any of that. It's saving. It was them obeying the word of God. Just like it is not anything else but us obeying the word of God that saves us.
Yes. Did y'all get that? It's obeying the word that saves us. That's why we study history. This is a lesson in obedience. Okay, in verses 14 and 15, what?
If you couldn't pick and choose which piece of this you wanted
Correct.
to obey, because
Correct.
your first one was going to be dead. If you didn't do exactly what you were told to do.
If you didn't do exactly what God said, what was your result? You were dead. So in chapter 12, I'm going to try and get finished in the time I have. In chapter 12, verses 14 and 15, why is God creating the Passover? A remembrance. Do the Jews still celebrate Passover? Is that calendar set in stone? If you notice, Passover changes year to year when it happens. It always happens at a certain time, but the day changes, right? I can tell you it does because if you watch where Easter falls, you know where Pentecost was. And it falls differently every year. What were the Jews supposed to eat?
Unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread. Remember that. I'm going to show you why they had to. And I'm going to show you why God made sure they did. And bitter herbs. Okay. How strong was the command to not use yeast? Chapter 12, verses 16 to 28. You're supposed to remove every little bit. You're not supposed to keep it. You're not supposed to have it. You're not supposed to feed it to your critters. If you've got slaves who aren't Hebrews, you're not supposed to give it to them. You are not supposed to eat it on Passover in the years that follow. Not here when this plague happens, but as the remembrance. They're not supposed to eat unleavened bread, right? So, we've gone from Exodus chapter 10, verse 27, to Exodus chapter 12, verse 29. What happens in verse 29? We've already said it's midnight. And the Lord passed through the land. How long is that right there?
Well, you went all over that, all over.
No. We've gone from 10 verse 27, 12 verse 29. We've covered 40 or 50 verses of text and time, right? We get to 12 verse 29, and it happens when? At midnight. He passes through the land. And it was automatic.
That's what I said.
Right. But there was no... I guess what I'm saying is, you see how long it took to build that up in the Scripture? And then it happened. And we get this sense of when God's ready to take care of the problem, God takes care of the problem. Then from Exodus chapter 12, verse 30, through Exodus chapter 12, verse 42 is the aftermath. So, the Pharaoh's son has died. Who does Pharaoh call? Moses, get over here right now. Moses, gather your people and get out. You don't get to wait till morning. It's midnight, 12:30. Get out. What do the Israelites get to take? Their flocks, their herds, the silver, the gold, the clothes the Egyptians gave them, their bread they were making. Did the bread have time to rise? It was unleavened. So the bread they were making to eat the next day hadn't risen yet. It's unleavened bread. When they leave, they take that with them. How many people left?
About 600,000 men on foot.
About 600,000 men.
Besides women and children.
When you count women and children, they generally add 4. It's somewhere in a number north of 2 million probably.
Yeah.
Now, everybody look at verse 38. We think of Jews as a pretty singular individual group of people, right? Today? I mean, that's what we think. What does verse 38 tell us about the people that left Egypt?
All kinds of people.
Mixed people, all kinds of people. Mine says ethnically diverse.
Who else was there? I'm just curious.
I don't know. Everybody the Egyptians had brought back from conquering. Was Egypt one of the major powers in the world at the time? Yeah, they were. There have been historical reports that it was upwards of 10 million people that left. I don't know if that number is right.
Even when Christ comes back, there's people around you watch you. They will never come in, but they'll watch you to see how you live. And when judgment day comes, they will try to get in, but it's going to be too late. But the point is, they always on the outside looking in to see what you're doing.
So, how many people started in Egypt when the Hebrews or the Israelites moved there? How many people moved to Egypt when Israel moved there? One family. I'm just going to do it that way. Approximately 70 people. How many years has it been since they moved there? 400? No, it is 430 years. It says so in the Bible.
You got the pre-Hanukkah year, and you got the Polanica year. Right? The year's about 130. And the pre-Hanukkah, I don't know exactly how many years that is. The ones that put out talking about Adam and Eve. See, then they laid on to the Polanica, which is Jewish. That's about 430.
Okay, so let's go to verse 40 in chapter 12. 430 years. And the next verse says they left on? They left on the same day they got there.
The very day.
430 years later, to the same day.
And was it night on watch?
Gee, we talk about plans, right? I think God had a plan. Okay, let's go to Matthew chapter 26. This is the history part of your lesson. So we're in the year AD 30, maybe 33, somewhere in there. Are the Jews still observing Passover? Yes, they are. What happens in Matthew chapter 26, verse 17? In Matthew, the disciples come up and say, hey, Jesus, can we go prepare for Passover? He tells them yes. Now, in other places, there's more of the story, but we're just looking at Matthew because it's the Jew history, right? So we have how much history between Moses starting the Passover and now? We say 3,000, 3,500 years maybe? I don't know. Long time, right? Jews have still been observing Passover since Moses started it. They're still doing it the same way. They still eat unleavened bread. I don't know. I would have to watch in New York when that happens, because I know there's a large Jewish community. But sometimes you'll see blood on doorposts and lintels.
But see that, that's the trouble. And instead of Peter, we find out that it's kind of like waiting on the Jews to repent. Now, how many it is, I don't know. And some of the commentators are saying that's what they're waiting on. The apostles was waiting on the Jews to come out and repent from the old law. But they ain't done it yet.
There is some of that discussion. For our lesson today, we're not going there.
Yeah, okay.
So, we have all this history that happened, and now we're here, 3,500 years later. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 26, what does Jesus institute?
The Lord's Supper.
The Lord's Supper. We call it communion, we call it the Lord's Supper. What is it? Unleavened bread, fruit of the vine. Two simple things, right? What do they remember?
His blood and his body.
His blood and his body is life, death, and resurrection. But it's history. It's his story. We remember every Sunday when we come here, right? Do we have to pick a lamb? He's already picked, right? Let's say, now, just for sake of argument, let's say every Christian on earth was a Jew. How big would the flock of sheep and goats have to be for all of us to pick a lamb? How many of us would gather as a household set to pick our lamb? And oh, by the way, that means you can't get rid of the male lambs, which in a lot of farming communities you do because they only need one or two. So for history's sake, Passover becomes the Lord's Supper. Are we still doing this today? Absolutely. Do we do it once a year? Jews only did it once a year. Why I gotta do it every week? Because that's our example, right?
Because you see, it continue for the two best Jews that will come to the Lord Supper. His body and his blood. You can't go with them there. That's it.
Yes. Okay, one more history lesson and I'm going to quit. Look at Acts chapter 11. Starting in verse 19. What's happening in Antioch?
Being persecuted.
Okay. How did those Christians get to Antioch? There was a dispersal of Christians from Jerusalem as part of persecution. What kind of Christians are in Antioch? Jews?
They were Christians first, wasn't they?
But back up a little bit. You got Jewish Christians. What other kind of Christians you got in Antioch? There's like 5 or 6 different ethnic groups of Christians. You got Greeks. When you look there, there's a big ethnically diverse group of people in Antioch, right? Look at this room. Are we diverse? Yes, we are. Are we still following the pattern? Yes, we are. What are they called first in Antioch? Christians. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope you like to continue to study history. You're welcome.